What is it that truly frightens a man when nothing is happening? Not the danger in front of him, but the unrest within. Not the enemy he can see, but the tension he cannot silence. Fear rarely announces itself as fear. It arrives as urgency, as irritation, as the need to prove, to control, to escape. Most men believe fear disappears when power is acquired. More influence, more certainty, more leverage over the world outside. Yet history offers a quieter correction. The men who conquered territories were often prisoners of their impulses. The men who mastered themselves stood unshaken, even in defeat. Fear does not dissolve when life becomes safer. It dissolves when the mind becomes sovereign. We live in an age that confuses noise with strength, reaction with courage, dominance with authority. The Stoics saw through this illusion. They understood that true command does not begin in the hands, the voice, or the posture, but in the ruling faculty of the mind, what they called the inner citadel. What modern neuroscience recognizes as emotional regulation, attentional control, and impulse mastery. When the world presses in, the untrained mind tightens, the nervous system accelerates. Dopamine pulls attention toward threat and craving. Reaction becomes reflex. Fear takes the throne. But there is another posture available to the human being, a way of standing inwardly unmoved, a state where pressure is observed, not obeyed, where emotion is felt but not allowed to command. Stillness, then, is not withdrawal. It is authority without display, power without aggression. The man who commands himself does not negotiate with fear. He does not rush to silence it. He outgrows it. If fear governs most men from within, what frees the rare few who walk untouched? Before you rule the world, you must rule the impulse. Every life is governed by a command structure, whether acknowledged or not. For most men, this structure is invisible. It operates beneath awareness, issuing orders in the language of sensation, urgency, and habit. A thought arises, attention follows, the body leans forward, action happens. And only afterward does reason arrive, attempting to justify what has already been done. The Stoics saw this clearly. They understood that the human mind is not a single voice, but a hierarchy. At its center stands what they called the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty. Not the place where impulses are born, but the place where permission is granted. Not the origin of fear, but the authority that either contains it or releases it into action. Epictetus returned to this point relentlessly. You are not disturbed by events. You are disturbed by the judgments you allow to pass unexamined. This was not poetry, it was diagnosis. Fear does not enter the mind by force. It is invited through consent. Modern neuroscience now gives this ancient insight a biological foundation. When an impulse arises, the brain presents a choice long before conscious thought narrates it. If the prefrontal cortex remains engaged, perspective holds, context is maintained. But when impulse dominates, control shifts downward into older neural circuits designed for survival, not wisdom. Dopamine accelerates attention toward threat or reward. The nervous system tightens, time collapses into urgency, reaction masquerades as necessity. This is why fear feels so convincing. It does not argue, it pushes, it bypasses reflection and demands immediate obedience. Most men mistake this intensity for truth. They believe that what feels urgent must be important, that what feels threatening must be real. The Stoic path begins with refusing this lie. Between stimulus and response, there exists a narrow opening, not a pause of comfort, but a pause of command, a moment in which the ruling faculty can either abdicate or assert itself. This moment is small, but it is decisive. Within it lies the difference between a man who reacts and a man who governs himself. This is not suppression. It is not denial. It is orientation. The impulse is allowed to exist, but it is not allowed to rule. The emotion is felt, but it is not crowned. Andrew Huberman describes this capacity in modern terms as impulse control and delayed gratification. Yet stripped of scientific language, it is the same ancient discipline, the ability to hold attention steady while the body urges movement. The ability to remain still while chemistry demands action. Each time this command is exercised, the nervous system adapts. Neural pathways reshape. The prefrontal cortex strengthens its influence. Reaction slows. Perspective widens. Fear loses speed, then force, then authority. Most fear is not danger. It is velocity without direction. And when impulse no longer governs the inner world, another challenge emerges. One more subtle, one more complex. If impulse is the first battlefield, emotion is the second. Apatheia is not numbness. It is precision. Once impulse is no longer obeyed automatically, emotion steps forward with greater clarity, not as an enemy, but as a force seeking direction. Many misunderstand Stoicism here. They imagine a life flattened of feeling, drained of warmth, sealed against pain. But the Stoics never taught emotional absence. They taught emotional accuracy. Seneca warned that unchecked emotion does not make us human, it makes us unstable. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that feelings arise like weather, but character decides whether the storm governs the city. Apatheia, in its original meaning, was never numbness. It was freedom from destructive passions, the capacity to feel without being possessed. Modern psychology gives this ancient discipline a name: emotional regulation. Daniel Goleman describes it as the ability to recognize emotion without becoming it, to allow the signal to pass through awareness without letting it seize command. Neuroscience explains why this matters. Dopamine surges when desire lacks direction. It pulls the mind forward into anticipation, craving, comparison. Left ungoverned, it fragments attention and amplifies anxiety. Serotonin, by contrast, stabilizes the internal sense of order. It reflects perceived status, safety, and coherence within the self. The Stoics did not know these chemicals by name, but they trained their effects with precision. Through reframing, reflection, and deliberate perspective, they reshaped how emotion was interpreted. What modern cognitive behavioral therapy calls cognitive reappraisal, the Stoics practiced as philosophy in action. An insult was not an insult until the mind agreed. A loss was not devastation until meaning collapsed around it. Fear was not fear until imagination crowned it as certainty. Emotion, then, is not truth. It is information. The untrained man treats emotion as command. He reacts because he feels. He justifies because he is stirred. His inner world becomes a tribunal where passion always wins. The trained mind listens differently. It allows emotion to speak, but not to rule. Anger becomes a signal, not a weapon. Desire becomes energy, not compulsion. Sadness becomes depth, not paralysis. This is alchemy, not the removal of feeling, but its refinement. Each time emotion is observed without immediate action, the nervous system learns restraint. The amygdala quiets. The prefrontal cortex reasserts context. Fear loses its ability to overwhelm because it is no longer fused with identity. The man who commands himself does not fear emotion. He understands it, he shapes it, he integrates it into a larger order. Yet emotional mastery alone is incomplete. Feeling without direction is chaos refined, but still chaos. To become truly untouchable, emotion must serve something higher. Meaning must give it shape. The man with meaning is untouchable. When impulse is restrained and emotion is refined, a deeper vulnerability reveals itself. Not chaos of feeling, but chaos of direction. A man may regulate his reactions yet still feel uneasy, calm, but restless, stable, but hollow. This unease is not fear in its raw form. It is the anxiety of a life without a center, The Stoics understood that fear often emerges not from danger but from disorder, from a mind that does not know what it is moving toward, from a life fragmented into competing desires, borrowed goals, and unexamined obligations. Musonius Rufus taught that philosophy was not speculation, but alignment, a way of arranging life so that action, value, and identity pointed in the same direction. Cato the Younger lived this truth with uncompromising clarity. He did not adapt his principles to circumstances, he adapted his endurance to principle. This is why meaning terrifies chaos. Modern psychology reaches the same conclusion through different language. Jordan Peterson describes meaning as the antidote to existential anxiety. When a man knows why he acts, his nervous system stabilizes. Ambiguity no longer feels like threat because direction is preserved. Neuroscience confirms this from within the body itself. A coherent sense of purpose lowers baseline cortisol. The brain interprets challenge differently when hardship is framed as responsibility rather than randomness. The unknown no longer triggers panic. It becomes terrain. Fear feeds on ambiguity. It multiplies when the mind is forced to negotiate with itself at every decision. Should I stay or leave? Should I speak or remain silent? Should I endure or escape? This constant internal debate keeps the nervous system in a low-grade state of alarm, not because danger is present, but because orientation is absent. Meaning resolves this tension, not by providing certainty, but by providing hierarchy. What matters more? What matters less? What is non-negotiable? The Stoics did not seek happiness as pleasure or comfort. They sought eudaimonia, human flourishing through virtue, a life governed by wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. A life where action is measured not by outcome, but by alignment with what is right. When a man lives this way, fear loses its central position. Loss still hurts, but it does not dismantle identity. Failure still occurs, but it does not collapse meaning. Criticism still arrives, but it does not redefine worth. The man with meaning is not fearless because nothing threatens him. He is fearless because nothing confuses him. His nervous system senses order. His mind senses continuity. His actions follow a clear internal axis. Yet meaning, if left abstract, remains fragile. A belief admired in quiet moments, abandoned under pressure. Without repetition, it dissolves into philosophy without embodiment. To become untouchable, meaning must be practiced daily. It must be trained into the nervous system, carved into habit. And this brings us to the discipline that transforms intention into structure. You become what you repeatedly command. Meaning clarifies direction, but direction alone does not change the body. The nervous system does not obey ideals. It obeys repetition. This is where most men break their alignment. They understand what matters, yet live as if understanding were enough. They confuse insight with transformation. But the Stoics never made this mistake. They knew that character is not declared, it is trained. What you repeatedly command becomes structure. What you repeatedly tolerate becomes habit. And what you repeat long enough becomes identity. Modern neuroscience now confirms what Stoic discipline assumed from observation. The brain is not fixed. It is sculpted by use. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition, not intention. Neuroplasticity does not respond to motivation. It responds to practice. Joe Dispenza speaks of this in modern language. The body learns the mind, and once learned, it resists change. This is why old reactions return under stress, why fear reappears when pressure rises. The nervous system defaults to what it knows. The Stoics designed their practices precisely to interrupt this default. Premeditatio malorum was not pessimism, it was exposure therapy, a way of rehearsing loss so that fear lost its novelty. Voluntary discomfort was not asceticism, it was nervous system calibration. Cold, hunger, restraint were tools to teach the body that discomfort does not equal danger. Reflection was not journaling for comfort, it was cognitive restructuring, a nightly audit of thought, impulse and action, an ancient form of neural feedback. Discipline, then, is not force applied from above. It is design applied from within. Each small act of restraint reshapes circuitry. Each deliberate pause trains the prefrontal cortex to stay online under pressure. Each repeated act of alignment teaches the nervous system coherence. This is why discipline feels unnatural at first. It contradicts existing wiring. The body resists not because the path is wrong, but because it is new. Most men interpret this resistance as proof they are failing. In truth, it is proof that change is occurring. Over time, effort decreases. What was once forced becomes familiar. What was once difficult becomes neutral. Fear loses its intensity because the body no longer associates challenge with collapse. This is the quiet miracle of discipline. It removes drama. It replaces chaos with rhythm. The man who commands himself does not rely on willpower. He builds systems of behavior that carry him forward even when motivation fades. His discipline becomes invisible, embedded, automatic, and when the nervous system is trained this way, fear finds no foothold. Not because fear disappears, but because it no longer commands behavior. When the mind is sculpted by discipline, stillness becomes natural. And from stillness, sovereignty emerges. Stillness as sovereignty. When impulse no longer rules, when emotion is refined rather than feared, when meaning provides orientation and discipline sculpts the nervous system, a quiet transformation occurs. Fear does not vanish. It loses authority. This is the distinction most men never grasp. Fearlessness is not the absence of fear. It is the absence of submission. The Stoics never promised invulnerability. Marcus Aurelius wrote while surrounded by war, illness and betrayal. Yet his writings reveal no panic, no collapse, no desperation to control what lay beyond his reach. What he cultivated was inner sovereignty, a mind ordered enough that circumstance could not overthrow it. Modern neuroscience describes this state as emotional resilience. Stressors still activate the nervous system, but regulation returns faster. The amygdala may signal threat, yet the prefrontal cortex remains present. The body responds without spiraling. The mind observes without fragmenting. This is stillness in motion. The man who commands himself does not harden against life. He becomes flexible without losing form. Pressure does not break him because it does not confuse him. Most fear arises from internal division. One part of the mind wants safety, another wants recognition, another wants escape. This fragmentation amplifies uncertainty until even small challenges feel overwhelming. But the trained mind is unified. Impulse is aligned with reason. Emotion serves meaning. Action follows values. When the inner hierarchy is clear, fear has nowhere to anchor. This is why bravado fails, why aggression collapses under sustained pressure, why dominance over others often masks inner instability. True authority is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not rush. It does not demand reassurance. The man who fears nothing is not reckless. He is precise. He understands what is within his control and releases what is not. He does not waste energy resisting reality. He adapts without surrendering principle. Neurochemically, his system reflects coherence. Serotonin stabilizes internal status. Dopamine is no longer hijacked by craving or threat. Attention widens, time slows. What once triggered urgency now invites assessment. What once provoked fear now demands judgment. This is sovereignty, not over outcomes, but over response. Not over the world, but over interpretation. Such a man does not need to dominate circumstances because he is not enslaved by them. Loss does not dismantle him. Uncertainty does not provoke panic. Criticism does not fracture identity. Fear fades not because danger disappears, but because the self is no longer divided. And when the self stands whole, stillness becomes strength. The inner citadel. Finally, what remains is not an idea, but a posture of being. The Stoics spoke of the inner citadel as a place no force could breach, not because walls were high, but because governance was complete. Nothing essential depended on chance. Nothing vital was outsourced to circumstance. This is the end of fear's authority. Not the dramatic end imagined by those who chase invincibility, but the quiet end known only to those who have ordered themselves from within. Power begins inside, not as domination, but as coherence. When impulse no longer rebels against reason, when emotion no longer fractures judgment, when meaning no longer competes with distraction, discipline becomes peace, not because life grows easier, but because resistance dissolves. The nervous system learns trust, the mind learns proportion, the self learns continuity. Stillness, then, is not absence of movement, it is the absence of inner conflict. The man who commands himself does not need reassurance from the world. He does not borrow confidence from applause or certainty from outcomes. His authority is internal and therefore stable. This is not motivation, it is alignment, not inspiration, but clarity. A life lived this way does not announce its strength. It carries it quietly, in measured response, in disciplined attention, in unshaken presence. And when the noise fades, when urgency loosens its grip, what remains is command, a pause, a breath, and then stillness.